Wide receiver ranks and tiers for week 14. We're here to help you nail those start-sit decisions. So let's start with the S tier. Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Rashee Rice, George Pickens, Puka Nacua, and Devontae Adams. Jaxon Smith-Njigba has been the old reliable, the superstar that never let you down. Last week he let you down to 4.3 fantasy points. Was it a 1 week blip or any concerns this week, or is it just a case of lock load in your wide receiver one spot?
Yeah, look, what we've seen from Jaxon Smith-Njigba this year has been so good and so strong for the vast majority that everyone's allowed a blip. Even Christian McCaffrey, Jamar Chase, these players, they have blips. Now, the reason I'm going straight back to him is the Falcons have allowed the sixth most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They've allowed the fourth most touchdowns on deep passes. You could spin it one way of saying, okay, well, JSN has been slightly less productive against single high defenses, which Atlanta run the second most single high coverage. JSN's yard per route run is 4.74 against too high. It drops by a full yard per route run down to 3.73 against single high. 3.73 yards per route run is still absolutely elite and a fantastic number. And I'm very much expecting him to bounce back and have a good game here.
Yeah, and then in the A tier, we do have Nico Collins, Jameson Williams, Jalen Waddle, AJ Brown, Chris Olave, and Emeka Egbuka. We talked in the wide receiver, the quarterback video rather, about how CJ Stroud, the offensive line seemed to be getting back. It should hopefully allow CJ Stroud to play potentially back to rookie level CJ Stroud. Surely that's got to be only good things for Nico Collins.
Well, I mean, friend of the channel, JJ Zacharyson, pointed out that Nico's averaging 16.3 PPR points per game since week one, which is ninth best among qualified wide receivers during that time frame. Like Nico Collins, before the season started, he was the kind of player that a lot of people were like, oh, dark horse candidate to finish with the most yardage. And we both had high expectations for a player that we really liked. And it hasn't felt quite fantastic because the Texans offense just hasn't been, I don't know, it's just not been fun. Is probably the way I would look at it. Outside of those weeks with Davis Mills, where it felt like it was getting back to it, and CJ Stroud for his part, yeah, he did look okay last week. Now, the Chiefs are not an ideal defense for a wide receiver to be going up against. Their pass defense isn't as strong as it's been in recent years. They're ranked 16th in EPA, but they haven't given up huge amounts of fantasy production either. But last week, we saw them give up 262 receiving yards to wide receivers last week. The week before, it was 111, and the week before that, 225. So the Chiefs' defense is definitely starting to slide. And talked about in the quarterback video that the way to get at the Chiefs really is through play action. They allow a league-high completion rate in play action. So it'd be nice to see the Texans try to develop some of that and take some shots downfield to Nico Collins. But there's no way that I'd have any qualms about starting a guy of Nico Collins' caliber.
Also in this tier, we have got AJ Brown. You and I discussed him 2 weeks ago and said how Devonta Smith was the wide receiver one in this offense. Since we uttered those words, AJ Smith has been on the tear, posted 60.2 fantasy points across the last 2 weeks. That is more than any other wide receiver in fantasy. So are we comfortable with AJ Brown again, or do you think the rug could be pulled and this offense could look somewhere else this week?
Yeah, I mean, we've both got him ranked exactly the same this week, and I'm kind of saying trying to build arguments for AJ Brown and try to build arguments against him. And the volume's been so consistent. The usage has been so consistent. And I think this is a week where if he's going to get there, he's going to get there on volume and potentially through the odd touchdown against the Chargers defense that has allowed the ninth fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They rank seventh best in pass EPA allowed. But what I will say is that the stats pop much more for Devonta Smith this week. Going up against zone coverage, AJ Brown sees only 1.72 yards per route run against zone, whereas against man, he's over 3.2. Devonta Smith is at 2.3 versus zone, 1.6 versus man. it's the opposite of what we would want to say if we were trying to build the case for a massive AJ Brown game. But I think he's still going to have a very nice week and probably get there on volume.
And before we move into the B tier, you've made it this far into the video. You're obviously enjoying what you see. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you do not miss a video that we put out. In the B tier, we do have Justin Jefferson, Lad McConkey, Christian Watson, T. Higgins, Jacoby Myers, Michael Wilson, Terry McLaurin, and Michael Pittman. We are projecting T. Higgins to come back from injury from the concussion. He was a limited participant in practice this week. Any trepidation, hesitation about starting him, or is it a case of Joe Burrow is active, T. Higgins is active, he's got to be in your lineup?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to that. Like, you look at the over-under of 50 points, you look at how well the Bengals have played against the Bills historically. Like, Joe Burrow's done very well in those games. And T, it can be volatile. Like, you look back across this season, and he's had 4 games below 8 points. He's had 7 games below 12 points. But you know that he can hit for 20 points, 30 points at any given point. And with Joe Burrow back out there and a pass-heavy Bengals, I've got enough faith where it's too hard to even get him down to like wide receiver 24 range. I think he's still one of those people that you should be putting into your lineup without really querying it.
Michael Wilson's posted 33.5 points, 21.8 points in the 2 games without Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison left last week's game with a heel injury. We're not sure if he's going to start. If there is no MHJ, is Michael Wilson potentially a borderline wide receiver 1?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, going up against the Rams, who allow 14th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position, who have a habit of dragging teams into shootouts, I think that's fair. Like, the Cardinals are underdogs by 8 points, which again points towards a pass-heavy script. And last week, Michael Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr. were tied for a 17.5% target share. But the previous 2 games, Michael Wilson was at a 30.8% over that period. So, yeah, I think for Michael Wilson would probably nudge up further in my rankings if we got it confirmed that Marvin Harrison wasn't out. If Marvin Harrison plays, he'll probably fall, but only slightly, and he'd still be no worse than the C tier.
Last week, Terry McLaurin returned from injury. It did only see 51% of snaps, but saw a, quite frankly, mind-boggling 43.75 targets per route run. I thought he looked great. I'm expecting a full complement of snaps. Marcus Mariota's balling. Maybe we get Jaden Daniels, but Terry McLaurin feels like the player that you drafted him to be, but it's a shame because you're probably sat on a 2-11 roster right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he hurt teams for sure. Wide receiver 8, though, last week, 14 targets, 7 for 96 and a touchdown. Obviously left it very, very late to do that. I do worry a little bit going up against Minnesota. Like, they are a very blitz-heavy team. We saw what we did to Sam Darnold last week. They absolutely went after, they went after him with blitzes, even though it didn't necessarily work. They still threw him off his game enough that he couldn't get to JSN. Whether we get Marcus Mariota or whether we get Jaden Daniels, I'm not sure. But Terry McLaurin has seen dips when playing against 2 high safety coverages, which is what the Vikings like. That's their identity as well. They lead the league in that. He sees his yards per route run drop from 2.5 down to 1.7 when he's facing 2 high safeties. So it's not ideal for him because, yes, you want those deep shots, and 2 high safeties tend to take that away. But I think this has got the potential to be a sneaky fun game, and I'm probably not going to bench Terry McLaurin after the week that we saw from him last week.
In the C tier, a little bit skinnier this week, we do have Devonta Smith, Zay Flowers, Cortland Sutton, and Deebo Samuel. Death, taxes, and Zay Flowers scoring more than 10 fantasy points until last week. Do we think that was just a 1-week blip and we can get back on this train this week, or do you have any more trepidation given the matchup?
Well, let's just be clear. Zay Flowers should have scored more than 10 points because the OPI that was called on him was exactly the same one as Jamar Chase pushed off gently on his touchdown, and it wasn't called on him. So,
Not that
yeah.
you're bitter, Tom.
Well, look, we're just after a bit of consistency here. And Zay Flowers, particularly as somebody who I thought would score more than his over-under of 5.5 touchdowns this year, yeah, it would be nice if he could score some touchdowns. I don't know, man. Like, I don't really stray into Ravens Twitter too often, but when I do, the Ravens fans are starting to turn on Zay Flowers. Like they're getting mad with him for leaving yards on the field because he cuts back so often, and that twitchiness and cutback is what makes Zay Flowers so special. There are going to be times where it does leave yards on the field, but I'm okay with it. Zay Flowers is 13th in the NFL in receiving yards, but he's second in AFC receiving yards. That stat was by Garrett Ferguson on Twitter, which just kind of blew my mind a little bit. I think he can bounce back enough here because the coverages that Pittsburgh play favor Lamar. We talked about in the QB video. Pittsburgh played fifth most single high coverage against single high. Lamar ranks first in QB rating. He ranks first in yards per attempt. He ranks third in deep throw rate versus single high coverage. And Zay, against single high coverage, has a 2.66 yards per route run. That's almost a yard higher than like two high safety looks. But everybody across the Ravens gets notable bumps because Lamar's just so good against those single high safety looks. So I get it. It's been miserable. We expected better. We thought we were getting the breakout in week one. But I mean, I'll be playing Zay Flowers where I have him. I don't think we're at the point where you bench him just yet.
No, absolutely. And if those Ravens fans do want to trade away Zay Flowers because they're fed up with him, the Jets will happily trade him. We've got plenty of late first round picks. You can have one of the Colts future firsts, and I'll happily snap Zay Flowers off your hands. Before we do move into the detail, though, if you are looking at your roster and not quite sure who should be starting, who should be sitting, and these videos haven't answered it for you, get in the comments below. Tom and I will answer 100% of your questions whenever you end up asking them. In the D tier, we do have Khalil Shakir, Alec Pierce, Brian Thomas Jr., Chris Godwin, Troy Franklin, Rome Odunze, DK Metcalf, Romeo Doubs, and Jaden Higgins. Brian Thomas, an absolute superstar as a rookie, has been incredibly difficult to rank this year. Yet we've got him 2 tiers below Jakobi Meyers. Is this just where he deserves to be? And as painful as that sounds, as a second round pick to start the season.
Brian Thomas has one game over 12 PPR points this year. Like at a certain point, if you are ranking him higher than this, like I need to hear the justification for it because he's the wide receiver 47 in PPR points per game. Like there is no reason. Like some guys who rank higher than Brian Thomas in PPR points per game, Kayshon Boutte, Romeo Doubs, Trey Tucker, Jakobi Meyers, Troy Franklin. Like there are a whole host of players who weren't drafted or who were drafted much later than Brian Thomas who have been far more productive and far more consistent. Now, it was really reassuring to see Brian Thomas have an 84% route participation last week, but it only gave him a 12% target share. And over his last 3 games, he's not really, I don't think he's been past 15% target share in any of them. This game against the Colts does set up well, though, because the Colts, they're a good defense. Lou Anarumo's done great stuff with them. They rank 13th in EPA allowed, but they give up the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers because typically these games with the Colts, there's a lot of plays involved in them. We tend to see a lot of back and forth, and there's a little bit of hope for him. And if I was really trying to build a positive case, I'd point towards the fact that the Colts have allowed the 9th most completions of 20-plus yards. I'm just not sure that Trevor Lawrence is looking that deep for him. I think Trevor Lawrence is much more happy to take the crossing route with Jakobi Meyers, to take the check down to the slot in Brenton Strange, and to take the ball and run instead of try to get the ball all the way down to Brian Thomas.
I think it's less about Trevor Lawrence. I think this is what Liam Cohen wants. I think Liam Cohen wants, to run the ball effectively, have lots of crossing routes, have lots of in-breaking routes, and utilize that play action, get those linebackers and safeties to bite up and feast on the space in behind. And if Brian Thomas can't run over the middle and can't catch the ball, he's not going to see the field sadly. One player who saw the field significantly less last week was Troy Franklin. We talked about him breaking out producing Cortland Sutton, looking phenomenal. And then we get the bye week. Out of the bye week, we then see Pat Bryant emerge as a 70% snap guy. Troy Franklin down at 52% of the snaps. Hardly saw any targets, only a 7% target share. Is this just a 1 week blip, or do you think this is post-bye rookie bump for Pat Bryant and Troy Franklin has fallen to third in the pecking order in Denver?
Yeah, it was really surprising. Like, I was watching this game on the Game in 40, and sometimes Game in 40s, you just lack that little bit of context to what's going on. And as it was going on, I'd keep looking and I'd be like, where's Troy Franklin? Where's Troy Franklin? Because we were, I definitely was quite aggressive on where I ranked Troy Franklin ahead of Cortland Sutton last week. And as the game goes on, it's like, have I missed an injury? No, wait, there's Troy Franklin, but why is he not consistently out there? So I'm a little bit surprised because Troy Franklin's played excellent, but then, this is the way with the Broncos and Peyton, isn't it? Like, things can be difficult to interpret at times. And yeah, Pat Bryant earned 7 targets to Franklin's 3. But I'm kind of still giving Franklin a little bit of credit because he's had 14 targets in the red zone this year. Nobody else on the team has hit double figures. He's caught 11 of his 14 targets down there. Like, he's been productive, and he's had 4 touchdowns in that area. Now, going up against the Raiders, who've given up 5 wide receiver touchdowns in the last 3 games and the 9th most fantasy points to the position, I'd like to think that this could be the kind of spot for Troy Franklin. My big concern is that Bo Nix is pretty poor against zone coverage, which we talked about more in the quarterback video. But I think that Bo Nix might struggle a little bit. And if Bo Nix is struggling, I'd like to see Troy Franklin, someone who's earned that trust this year, getting a little bit more work.
Yeah, I need to see more than 1 week before I panic. Maybe it was just a game plan specific thing where they wanted a physical receiver like Brian is rather than Troy Franklin. But if his snap share is reduced again this week, if his target share is reduced, then he's going to be difficult to rank this high, and he's probably going to be dropping down. In the E tier, we do have Quentin Johnson, A.D. Mitchell, Darnell Mooney, Keenan Allen, Xavier Worthy, and Jordan Addison. Adonai Mitchell, a throw-in for the Jets. The talent was never in question. It was whether he could get it sorted between years. Well, last week, he was phenomenal. 36% target share, winning consistently on outbreaking routes. A couple of deep shots involved as well. Posted 24.2 fantasy points. Is this one of those random late season pop-ups that, we can think of someone like Steven Sims back in the day who had 4 great fantasy weeks in the playoffs and then never did anything again in his career? Or do you think this could potentially be something longer term?
See, I was thinking Zay Jones there when you started. I wasn't quite thinking quite all the way back to Steven Sims. I do think it can work because you look at the attrition on the Jets and it's basically A.D. Mitchell. And then it's John Mechie. And last week, kind of talked about it, that John Mechie is the floor play because he was getting the safe, reliable stuff. And the A.D. Mitchell stuff is going to be far more volatile. But when it hits, it's going to hit in such a way that it helps you win your week. Now, A.D. Mitchell saw 7 targets in week 12, but caught only 2 of them for 42 yards. Then you go to last week where he caught a team leading 8 of 12 targets for 102 yards and a touchdown, which is like, over 20 points. That kind of stuff is fantastic, like what he's done and how often the Jets are trying to utilize him. It is noteworthy because he's averaging a 28% target share over the last 3 games, which is the 7th highest among wide receivers. And he's also averaged 51 receiving yards over those 3 games, obviously buoyed quite a bit by last week. Going up against the Dolphins have been a bit of a better defense lately. They do rank 29th in pass defense EPA across the course of the season. But Minkah Fitzpatrick's kind of dialed it up a little bit. Like, he looks like the better part of that trade than Jalen Ramsey right now. So part of me expects him to still have opportunities, but I don't think it's a gimme against the Dolphins defense in the same way that it would have been a few weeks ago.
In the F tier, we do have Dontavian Wicks, Trey Tucker, DJ Moore, and Luther Burden. Let's touch briefly on the Bears wide receivers, DJ Moore and Luther Burden. DJ Moore spiked back up to 90% of snaps. Luther Burden still getting some work, but not truly establishing himself. I really want to see Luther Burden on the field more. I think he looks fantastic. I think he looks great in space. But is this still the veterans wide receiver room? And probably got to rank DJ Moore slightly ahead of him.
I mean, it doesn't matter with DJ Moore. He's been wide receiver 68 or worse in 3 of his last 4 games. Like, it takes effort to be so crap that you finish as wide receiver 68 or worse. He's had 3 finishes as a top 30 wide receiver all year. We know that he has never been a consistent touchdown scorer throughout his career. Just give me Luther Burden instead, because particularly going up against his Green Bay defense, who is 3rd highest in zone coverage rate, Luther Burden leads the Bears in 2.54 yards per route run against zone. He's one of, like, basically him and Colston Loveland see bumps against zone coverage. DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Cole Kmet all see dips against zone coverage. So it would be very nice to see that. But ultimately, this game's probably going to be another one where the Bears load up their running backs and really try to attack through the ground game.
And that is it for the wide receiver positional preview. On your way out, make sure you're hitting that hype and thumbs up button. And of course, check out the rest of the rankings videos we've put out this week.